So, on the topic of secret societies, we have many different ones that have popped up throughout the ages, as I stated. If we go back to around 17,000 years ago, you have one of the earliest depictions of modern cave wall art made by the Cro-Magnon man, or the Cro-Magnon cave drawings. You can Google that or do some more research on that. But basically, those cave drawings depicted an understanding of constellations and an understanding of astrology to some extent. They were drawing patterns of stars in the sky on the walls. For what purpose, we're not 100% sure. Probably like any other time period, they were probably using the stars to measure time. But as culture, as people evolved over the last roughly 20,000 years, as human culture evolved, we created myths and stories and other types of ways in which we can project our humanity onto the stars. And a lot of people these days might know it as like the zodiac, where it's not 12 signs, from the Russian age, or the Russian age. It's not 12 signs from the Roman age, mumbo jumbo, horoscopes, blah, blah, blah. When we're referring to the zodiac, where the root of the word comes from is similar to the word zoo. It's like a gaggle of animals, like a group of animals. But it's not just animals, of course. There are different variations. The Egyptians, they had their own zodiac. The Babylonians and the Chaldeans had their own zodiac. The Greeks and the Romans had their own zodiac, which they adapted into the zodiac that you know today with the 12 signs.
The Chinese and the Indians also have their version of it.
Yes.
One of the common subdivisions of astrology nowadays is you typically have tropical and what's called sidereal, or
Right.
it's called sidereal, because
Right.
that's just what it looks like.
Right.
But the overall point is that people have been tracking the movement of these celestial bodies for, if you figure, when society started, when the first civilizations began to flourish, they already had this system highly developed.
Right.
So you have to figure that takes at least, conservative guess, another 4 to 5 generations just to come up with a rudimentary, rough basis of it.
Right.
And this is before you actually take into account their ability to track slower moving celestial bodies and their orbits, and how they interact not only with the observer on Earth, but with one another in the sky.
Yes, absolutely. So what we're getting at here is that the record of time came before the record of law. In other words, as human societies flourished, there was probably a basic understanding of law, as in, don't take my stuff. But law wasn't actually created until after humanity had already understood the concept of time. Because it hits you right in the face. I mean, you have to also keep in mind that to fully understand the people of the past, you have to put yourself in their shoes. And you have to realize they didn't have electricity. They didn't have technology, as far as we know. And the technology that they did have was very, very rudimentary. So
they had to rely on their senses a lot.
Right, and one of the key indicators of, if you were to wake up as a child from a very young age, you would see there is a ball in the sky that lights everything up for half of the day, and then the other half of the day it's dark. Why is that? Well, people naturally would start asking themselves questions, and they would start putting theories together. Probably the wisest men, sages, magus, things of those, nature,
early
shamans. Yeah, that was the word I was looking for. They all sat there and tinkered with the possibilities of different objects within the sky. A couple things that they noticed, and this is going to any age really. I mean, when you take a look back in time, as a quick side note, a lot of these secret societies believed that Atlantis existed roughly 12,000 years ago, and we're not here to discuss the credibility of that. What we're here to discuss is, since roughly You had the Cro-Magnon painting 17,000 years ago. Atlantis was somewhere around 12,000 years ago. And then between 12 and 6,000 years ago, there was a lot of history, a lot of stuff that happened, but we don't have too many records of it, apparently. Roughly about 6,000 years ago, according to geology, was when the flood of Noah or the Epic of Gilgamesh would have occurred. So we had this massive flood. Now, geologists can confirm that there was a massive flood 6,000 or so years ago. They also confirm there was one roughly 12,000 years ago. There was some sort of event that was very different that shaped the land in a completely different way for a short period of time compared to the 6,000 years prior. So what are we really getting at here? Well, over the last, if you want to call it 20,000 years, humanity has done a really great job at understanding the cosmic relation. And what I mean by that is, if you go back, let's just take 6,000 years ago. 6,000 years ago, the Babylonians and the Chaldeans were staring up at the sky, and they were thinking to themselves, remember, this was before Christ. This was before Judaism, really. I mean, this was the beginnings. And they were noticing a lot of things. One thing they noticed was that there were wandering planets. Most of the stars were fixed in the sky, but there were wandering planets. These wanderers became the 7 days of the week. And additionally, our calendar of time supersedes even, it is believed, the calendar of time, the creation of it, probably goes back before this flood that occurred 6,000 years ago. Why is that important? Because, number one, you can't really change the way time moves from our perspective. Time is, no matter if you want to keep it a 12-hour day cycle, 24-hour day cycle, it's still the same amount of time, relatively, from the human perspective. So they noticed all these different things in the sky working as different cogs in a wheel that was creating the laws of nature around them. And this is, relatively speaking, the start of spirituality, where the laws of nature were being understood in a mathematical and scientific way, a way interpreted by human beings, a way that we basically came up with. But we came up with it on a materialistic sense in relation to the cosmic opera, the cosmic orchestra that is being symphonied up in the heavens. So as the Earth takes 365 days to go around the sun, so too are there roughly 360 degrees in a circle. So it essentially equates. There's a lot of math and science that are involved with it. But this basic fundamental understanding of the cosmos is what started a lot of spiritual movements. And the proof of that are in the stories, in the mythos. You have a lot of proof of that if you really want to just look at two examples, Rome and Egypt. Both of them had deities based on cosmic objects in the sky. And the importance of that is a lot of the time misunderstood today because people don't understand why they were worshiping the sun or why they chose to worship specific things. A lot of it gets muddled today. People just assume that they were dumb people writing stuff on walls, but that's not the case at all. These people had a very in-depth understanding of the energy that they were trying to harness and trying to utilize. And that's how, that's how conspiracies or theories show different ways in which the pyramids could have been built. Even now, we're sitting here scratching our heads at it. So there's a lot of stuff that we could actually dissect when it comes to the secret societies.
Well, some of you might be wondering what exactly we're referring to when we say secret societies. It's a phrase that comes up a lot, and it's often associated with things like Freemasonry is probably the best one, but another great one would perhaps be the Illuminati. I'm sure everybody's heard of that.
Right.
So skipping over the fact that the Illuminati was a very real organization that was actually formed in the, I want to say, 1600s,
it was around the 1700s.
You can look up Mr. Adam Weishaupt, but regardless,
it was recently before the 1776.
Did you say the 1776?
Maybe I did. The signing of the Declaration of Independence, because majority of the people who were present are theorized to have been Freemasons or part of the Illuminati.
But the main takeaway is that since antiquity, it's usually referred to what's called the mystery schools.
Mm-hmm.
So you have these different cults that develop into larger organizations where they have your outsiders, your initiates when you want to become part of the club,
right.
and then you have your inner circle of people that decide who gets into the inner circle, and that more or less preserves and sometimes changes the secrets of these different mystery schools. So a few of the most common ones is you do have the Chaldean mysteries, you have the Eleusinian mysteries, you have the Delphic mysteries, the Bacchic mysteries,
yes,
the Pythagorean mysteries even. There's some evidence to suggest that an early sort of proto-Christian, very, very enlightened Jewish sect called the Essenes had their own mystery school.
Mm-hmm. And
at the mystery schools, the idea was they had their own specific cosmological outlook on the universe, but very typically in the inner group of these mystery schools, they taught that more or less there is one God, one faith, one law, which is a sort of deep metaphysical way of pointing to the reality that all faiths around the world and all different ways of looking at the cosmos is in effect a facet of one gem, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
They're all linked, and they're all more alike than they are different at the core of what they seek to do.
Yes, and from our understanding, from our interpretations, and from our studies, that generally seems to be the case. There seems to be an overwhelmingly large proportion of religious texts, religious understandings, religious doctrines, theories, and different ways of life that all correspond. And kind of to jump on that as a way of evidence, I guess you could say most modern religions, if you were to take Christianity, Judaism, if you were to take Buddhism, Hinduism, Shintoism, Taoism, even if you wanted to consider agnosticism and atheism in that sect, which I wouldn't really consider atheism part of it, but there are many atheists today who still have really good moral compass. Now, that could also be because they were raised in Judeo-Christian societies, which have had laws that have been based off of Scripture, and they follow those laws. But more so, I would say that the majority of religions that aren't necessarily negative, ones that people don't specifically go out and seek to try to understand, such as Satanism, I'll just use that as a blanket term. Most of the good ones, I'm using good, with I guess italics, abbreviations. Most of the good ones are based around the idea and the concept of just being a good person. Now, that's just a very high level interpretation, but you also have to agree that that's basically the interpretation of most religions these days, is to be a good person. And their whole entire philosophy is based around trying to teach you how to be a good person. But the deeper inner workings of what a lot of these prophets or a lot of ancient writers are trying to get at, a lot of it comes down to attempting to understand God in a way in which we've kind of created through math and science, philosophy, logic, reasoning, emotion, prayer, meditation, wisdom, love, things like that. So when you take a look at, if we were to go 6,000 years ago, for example, I think this is probably a good place to start. This is probably a good place to start talking about why people thought things the way that they did into different perspectives, and why people worship specific things and what they really mean. Maybe you think we could go down that?
Well, I mean, that's going to vary wildly depending on the culture and which symbol you're talking about specifically.
Right. Well, I can give an example for a brief example. 6,000 years ago, we would have been in the age of Taurus, and what that means, generally speaking. And we had mentioned this. Our sun is theorized by many people, one of which is the guru of yoga, Swami Sri Yukteswar Jiri. Thomas H. Burgoyne. A lot of different people theorized, and actually can say that it's a true fact, that the sun, our sun, is in a binary star system. What that means is that our sun rotates and revolves around another sun, basically, the same way that the Earth goes around the sun.
They revolve around each other.
They revolve around each other. Thank you. So these two objects basically revolve around each other.
I'm sorry.
In a symbiosis.
They revolve around a shared central gravitational point in space.
Yeah. If we're going to be extremely scientifically accurate, yes, that's exactly it. That's exactly it. Yes.
It matters.
It does matter. It does matter. So they revolve. They essentially revolve around one point in space, which allows them to revolve around one another. And a lot of people theorize that the star that our sun shares this binary star system with is the star Sirius. That's just one theory. There are other theories, such as it could be the Pleiades in the Taurus constellation. It could be the star Vega in the Capricorn constellation. But generally speaking, most ancient societies believed it to be the star Sirius, centraled in the Cancer sector of the sky. Now, why is that relevant? Well, because, and not only why is it relevant, but what the hell does this cycle have to do with what people thought 6,000 years ago? There's no way that they could have known that. Well, that's actually incorrect. If you look at religious texts and you look at scriptures and you go off of the basic understanding of what these people believed back in the day, and then we use scientific terminology to basically decode it today, these people actually knew a lot more than what we give them credit for, especially what the modern scientific community gives them credit for. And I'll explain why. Because 6,000 years ago, after the flood had resolved and humanity had to essentially restart again, there have been many, many reports that most societies and most little cultures, a lot of different historical studies have shown that a lot of cultures between 6,000 and 4,000 years ago were generally matriarchies. There have been, such as Native American cultures were matriarchies when they popped up. Hispanic cultures, such as the Maya, were matriarchies. There were a lot of African cultures, specifically ones that were centraled off of the coasts on the little islands, such as Madagascar. Many, many different societies that popped up in Europe, and little cultures and collections of people all over the Asiatic countries as well, had a tendency to be maternal. They had a tendency to have a woman as the leader. Now, why is that relevant to what I'm talking about? Well, because Taurus is generally a feminine sign. And when you take a look at this 24,000 year cycle that we are locked in, every 2,000 years, it shifts and changes to a different sign. Now, this basically just has to do with the position of where our sun is in relation to this other object believed to be the star Sirius. And the reason that this is important was because you probably have heard that we're entering the age of Aquarius, which means, essentially, on December 21st, 2012, we went out of the age of Pisces and into the age of Aquarius. Just as the Mayans had predicted the world was going to end, that was completely blown up by the media. What they actually said was that the end of this era was going to occur, and they were exactly right. The Piscean age, also associated with the fish, also associated with Jesus Christ, also associated with progression and deception, as in the two fish. This age lasted from roughly about 0 to 2012, roughly. Now, again, why is all of this relevant? Well, because the secret societies that still exist today, they utilize this calendar of a 24,000-year-old cycle. The societies that are modernly used today, or the societies that were generated 6,000 years ago, have used the same 24,000-year cycle. So if you take 24 and you divide it by 6, you get 4. Just as there are 4 seasons in a year, every 6,000 years you could essentially equate to a season. So think about it that way. Now, in the age of Taurus, you had a lot of different bull-related iconography pop up. For example, the story of Mithras. Mithras was the man who slayed the bull, and then the blood of the bull gave nourishment to all of those who were there to witness it. You had a calf and a sheep signifying the Aries, the lamb of God, and you had a calf, which was Taurus, present at the birth of Jesus Christ. You had, when Moses came down from the mountain and had his discussion with God, and he looked into the commandments, they were worshiping a golden calf. The calf represents the age of Taurus. So when you see Mithras slaying the bull, roughly about 5,000 to 4,000 years ago, what it's signifying is that the age of Taurus is coming to an end. Now, how did they know that it was the age of Taurus? Because on March 21st of every year, whatever sign is coming up over the horizon tells you in mathematical equation where you are in the universe, in this cycle. That's how we know that we go through this cycle, because of the precession of the equinox, which is essentially the changing of our position in the universe. And that's a big deal, because if you were to live a normal life of about 70 years, you go day by day, and you every year at March 21st you look at the sky, you're not going to see anything different. It is only the succession and the passing of this knowledge and wisdom for thousands of years in which we can say beyond a reasonable doubt that we know that we move through some kind of strange cycle that can be measured within the sky. So when they saw that the Taurus constellation was up over the horizon, roughly 6,000 years ago, it created a whole bunch of iconography related to the bull. And even today you have examples such as matadors going and trying to take down the bull. That is an homage to the Mithras story of slaying the bull. That's why they end up killing the bull at the end. You might be sitting there asking, why do they have to kill the bull? A lot of people who know about matadors know that the matador is essentially stabbing the bull every single time that he waves the red flag until the bull eventually dies. Why is that? Why do they have the run of the bull? Why is it that Hinduism, especially linked to Vedic astrology and Vedic Hinduism, they have Brahman as their key signifying creator god, the god that milked the Milky Way into existence? Or how in Norse mythology you have Ymir, the frost giant, who there was a giant calf that licked the ice and the salt off of the body of Ymir, the frost giant, and created the universe. So all of these strange iconographies related to a bull, related to a cow, milking itself or creating the heavens. We still call it the Milky Way galaxy, and we don't call it that because of a fucking candy bar. We call it that because there was presumed to be, at the start of our most modern cycle, 6,000 years ago roughly, we had all of these bulls creating the universe, because that's how human society saw it. You have to remember, this is 6,000 years ago. They're a lot smarter than we give them credit, but they still didn't have some of the technological revolutions that we had today, especially if they went through a giant cataclysm. And then you have to take a look at, how did these people perceive the world around them at the time? This was a big deal for them. This is why polytheism and monotheism had so many clashes throughout history, because you had the idea, always rooted, that there is one God, but there are multiple angels or deacons or different elements, planetary objects that were given life, were given a human essence that has been attached to them from the human perspective. And there's been this battle, at least that we were taught in modern educational systems, where there was this battle between polytheism and monotheism. Polytheism was more, yes, they worshipped Zeus. Yes, they worshipped Poseidon, if we're going to go to the Roman and the Greek era. Yes, they worshipped these different gods, but the majority of people at the time had an understanding that there was one element of maybe time or change, and there were different facets, such as Zeus ruling the sky, ruling the other gods, Poseidon ruling the ocean, Hades ruling the underworld. Different facets that kept this giant cosmic machine rolling. The Bacchic rites, I think. The Bacchic rites is one of the things that you brought up, where basically in Greek and Roman times, Dionysus or Bacchus was seen very heavily related to Mithras or Apollonius or Horus or Jesus Christ. He was basically a savior who was sacrificed. And there's a lot of sacrificial stories all throughout different theologies as well. We're not going to say that they're the exact same thing, but they have a lot of elements that are shared. Krishna, for example, Neja in Chinese mythology. So you have all these different sacrificial warriors, if you will. And Bacchus or Dionysus was another one of these guys. And the Bacchic rites were one of the most powerful secret societies that was within Rome at the time, until, of course, they did what a lot of secret societies seem to end up doing at some point, which is they end up dwindling and fizzling out because they turn in the wrong direction. Or at least if you are on the side of good, you would perceive having massive orgies and, blood orgies and blood sacrifices and stuff like that. You would see that as pretty bad, generally speaking. But that's basically what happened with the Bacchic rites. It was a secret society in Rome, which was holding a lot of different key pieces of information relating to human spirituality, and eventually it just kind of fizzled out. And the Romans, on behalf of the common Roman people, decided to intervene, and they stopped the Bacchic rites from continuing their practices, and that put a precedent on the Romans to be able to interfere with religious and spiritual affairs, which is eventually what led to the death of Jesus Christ, who was claiming that he was the Son of God.
Well, I think the Romans got more heavy-handed with him because they viewed him as more of a threat to their political hegemony
For sure.
in the Holy Land.
For sure.
And also they took their taxes, and that is the fastest way to get any government to come down on you is to take their taxes.
Yes.
They do not like that. Do not interfere with the government's ability to tax.
Right. So what we're bringing up here is there have been these weird iconographies. Not only weird iconographies, but weird. I forget the term. I think it starts with a P, but it's essentially projecting our humanity onto different aspects of life. And that's basically what the zodiac is. If you want to take the modern Roman zodiac, you take a look at it in the sky. They basically, Aries is a lamb, Taurus is a bull, Gemini is two twins based off of the stars Pollux and Castor. Those are the two stars which are the heads of the twins. So we've taken these human images and we placed them onto imagery within the stars. But we did that not only to mark time, but also to tell stories. And you have to find it odd that through thousands of years of battling wars, I guess you could call it racism to some extent, but more nationalism, people fighting and killing each other, claiming that their culture was better than others, and yada, yada, yada. They still all had relatively very, very similar ideals. For example, how is it possible that the Egyptians, the Chinese, and the Greco-Romans had a 12-based zodiacal calendar system? How did they all have that at the end of the day? Is it because they were all intermingling? Is it because they all got their information from secret societies, which were working with multiple different countries? It's more so a combination of all of those things. But it's also the fact that you can't run away from the truth. And the truth is, the sun will rise every morning. The moon will rise every night. There are a specific number of days in a year. And the cycle continues. If you wait one full year from summer, it's going to be summer again. And that truth remains constant. If you're in the same location, of course, northern, southern hemisphere, but we're not getting into the nitty-gritty details like that. What we're trying to get at here is there still are secret societies which take a look at the modern equivalent of astronomy, to interpret different things, to interpret revelations, or to interpret signs from God, maybe. Great examples. I actually have a book. It's called The Cosmic Serpent, but it was actually pretty pricey. You can get it off of Amazon, but it is by Bill Napier, and I forget the other guy's name, but they're both PhDs. And they basically discuss how you could take ancient texts, such as the story of Apollo versus Python, from Greek, or you could take the Egyptian story of Horus versus Typhon from Egypt. Or you could even take, and I think this is why the book is pricey, you could even take parts of the Bible, and you can interpret these parts as comets or asteroids hitting the planet. For example, Moses' plague, the PhDs make a pretty good point how a lot of what is described in Moses' plague when he attempts to get his people out of Egypt could be similar to if a meteor storm were to approach the earth. Now, that's just a theory. But when you take a look at a lot of these different stories that were had, and you understand, everybody knows that everybody knows that Romans took things from the Greeks and adapted it to planetary objects. So Zeus became Jupiter, and Ares became Mars. Pluto, Hades. All these different interpretations adapted from their gods, their deities, onto planetary objects. So there's plenty of proof. Horus, also from Egyptian, Horus, Set, Osiris, and Ra can be interpreted as the four corners of the universe. They can be interpreted as the four stages of the wheel of fortune or the wheel of life. And people don't understand that a lot of these cultures are linked. But the point I'm getting at is the secret societies have been looking at cosmology, cosmic interpretations like asteroids, meteors, planets, where they are, what angles they're at, what kind of energy do they give off, what signs are they in, what sector of the sky. They've been looking at that for thousands upon thousands of years. They still interpret it to this day. J.P. Morgan is actually being quoted in one of his biographies by the person who wrote it, saying that he stated, millionaires don't look at the stars. Billionaires look at the stars, because interpreting the understanding of where planetary objects are can have a very loose effect on the emotions that people feel at any given point in time. You can actually look at the stars that have been going on for the last few months, and if you look at how many asteroids and comets have approached our Earth since March of 2020, you can see that there has been some weird, strange cosmic influence. There are going to be weird, strange cosmic influences for the remainder of 2020, especially towards the end of 2020 in December. December is going to be a very big month, according to the stars. Now, we might sound a little bit crazy if we were to say something like, oh, you have to look at the stars. But what you might not realize is that the richest people are constantly observing the stars. That's what magicians and wizards and things like that back in medieval times, and even before that during the times of Zoroaster, that's what they were doing. They were interpreting planetary alignments. And that's why even on Wall Street today there's a giant bull, because Taurus is associated with money. That's why they call a good market a bull market and a bad market a bear market. And the bear in the sky is Ursa Major, also known as the Big Dipper. And the reason that that's important is because of where the north axis of the Earth points. It can point towards the bear, or it can point towards other constellations in the sky. So we have these different things on our planet. Another great example would be car logos. You go and take a look at zodiacal signs, and then you take a look at car logos, and you tell me they're not the same. Go look up what Subaru means in Japanese. It means the Pleiades. It's a 6 or 7 star cluster in the Taurus constellation, and that's exactly what the logo is. Honda, Dodge Ram, Toyota, all of these are different interpretations of signs. Saturn is heavily shown on the Nissan logo. You people might not think that it goes that deep, but it's right in front of your face. And a lot of these things are purposefully kept hidden from you so that they can be utilized to take advantage of you. Colors is a great example. People might not think colors actually matter, but they do. Depending on what colors that you're looking at, it can stir different emotions. So That's why there's a lot of red, yellow, and orange in fast food restaurant logos and not a lot of purple and blue, because they want you to feel on a lower vibrational level. And vibrations matter. Frequencies and vibrations, they matter. They matter a lot, actually. Not only in your own body, but also what you consume. And by consume, I mean what you eat, drink, and what you visually and auditorily take in. Vibrations from a sound perspective, from a light perspective, and from a physical perspective, such as food and drink, they matter very heavily, not only for your health physically, but your health mentally as well. Now, I can get into a lot of the deeper facets of things, but I feel as though at this point I'm rambling, and I'm basically just spewing a lot of different information at you all at once. And without actually seeing the tangible connections, it might not make a lot of sense, okay? But through many years, we're not sure how long, what we've come to understand here at Team Psycosmos is that throughout many cultures, there has basically been one process or one hidden secret that has been linked to a majority of modern religions. You might have heard things like the quest for the Holy Grail, the Fountain of Youth, the Philosopher's Stone.
The Green Lion.
The Green Lion. And we're not talking about Harry Potter here. We're talking about a secret, fundamental understanding, a bridge between man and God, and how you might be able to accomplish it. But for thousands of years, I would make the argument that we probably wouldn't know too much about it without the internet.
Oh, definitely not.
Yeah, so
at least us personally.
Us personally, we probably wouldn't know about it.
The internet's greatest strength is its access to the hard sources and the primary sources that have been used to create the narrative and the secondary source history that we commonly get taught in school and told by our professors and would-be authorities.
Right. What we found is that many of the secret societies in the last, I would say at least 2,000 years, it definitely goes beyond that, they understood the concept of what we've called on this channel known as the sacred secretion.
And they have different names for it. Right. Like we said, there's the Philosopher's Stone, the Elixir of Life, the Land of Milk and Honey,
sexual alchemy,
the Sacred Substance, Kundalini Energy,
Christ Oil,
Liquid Fire, Spirit Fire, the Holy Spirit, Amrita. All different names, and they all seem different, but in truth, they all speak to the same effect, and more often than not, they're cultivated by following similar practices.
And there have been many figures throughout history in different cultures that have taken on a physical, metaphysical role. Krishna is a great example. Ninja is another. Stories about a hero's journey.
And you can find either a literal or a metaphorical version of the story of them cultivating this, not only themselves and their conduct and how they treat other people, but this substance that will allow you to, in theory, attain enlightenment and the equivalent of perfection.
Right. So I think this is a really good time to talk about the sacred secretion, as it's very important. Why it's a secret, why people have kept it hidden for so long, what it is, how to process it, how to utilize it, how to interpret it, things like that.
And just as a precursor, if you're really interested in this stuff, because we're going to go into it in detail here, but there's two books that do a fantastic job of going through a lot of the source material and the thought process behind this substance. So if you get the chance, there's a wonderful book called The God Design by Kelly Marie Kerr, and she relies heavily on my favorite source for this material, and it's one of her big primary sources, which is called God Design, God Man, Word Made Flesh by Dr. George W. Carey.
Yes, and there are actually other books as well, such as The Secret Teachings of All Ages by Manly P. Hall. He discusses it in his book, The Light of Egypt by Thomas Burgoyne. He discusses it in his book. And there are plenty of others that we've seen that have alluded to it. But many that don't actually specifically outright say,
There's at least a few books that many of the titles are escaping me because unfortunately they're usually pretty long. But there's a few books written in the early to mid 1900s by scholars that were very interested in Hinduism and the roots of Hinduism in India, and they do a good amount of research into the Kundalini, which in many ways is the equivalent, or at least their version, their name for it, because to be honest, they probably came first, of what we call the sacred secretion.
Right. So Kundalini is, as far as the Tantric, Sanskrit, or Indian interpretation, it is the manipulation of energy within the human body via the utilization of the brain or the mind. Now, what does that mean? The harnessing of the power and the energy within the human body. Okay. You have to have an understanding of science, metaphysics, and a little bit about history and religion to understand these next couple of concepts, but we're going to try to break it down for you here.
There's essentially two sides to this. I would say three sides. Three sides would probably be the best way to think about it. Where you have the scientific materialist side, where you have evidence and philosophies that suggest that there is a very quote-unquote real substance in your body that assists and is involved very deeply with this process. You have the mental side of it, where you have to get your thoughts and your willpower and your mind under control to cultivate this, and you have to use it to engage in specific beneficial activities for yourself and those around you. And then you got the third aspect of it, which would be the soul or the spirit aspect of it, which is involved in how you view yourself with your mind and how you treat other people and how you act. But it really also has to do with your personal, indescribable relationship with the spirit of the universe or God or nature or whatever you want to call it and identify with.
Now, we're going to say a lot of things coming up here that you might not agree with. Which is fine. We're going to say a lot of things that, quite honestly, are theories that we have. And we're going to say a lot of things that you might not agree with and that you might think are potentially blasphemous. But please keep an open mind as we move forward, because we have spent years researching these topics. And they've all come together in a beautiful little package, and we've personally been experimenting with this process for over a year, and there have been tangible benefits and results. So this is basically the explanation. Okay.
Well, let's start with the mental and the spiritual first.
Okay.
I think that would be the strongest place to start.
Okay.
Because you can, in all these different religions and faiths and philosophies, you can always point very readily, very easily to this metaphorical truth that they all share, which is essentially that it varies in exact form. But if you are pious, so if you have a good relationship with God, and when we say God, we don't mean any particular God. We mean your personal idea of God, whatever that may be.
Right.
And if that doesn't really jive with you because you tend to lean on the atheist side, what we truthfully mean is being fundamentally fulfilled and pleased with who you are as a human soul and your benevolent relationship with this universe. Because even if you don't think that this universe or this world is inherently divine, you still have a very special, unique relationship to it, and like it or not, you need it. It to some capacity needs you, and you would not exist in this universe if it didn't exist.
Right.
Which is obvious, but you need this place for existence. So you have some sort of deep relationship with it that you can't escape. So that you might as well come to a place of understanding and appreciation for that relationship.
Yes. And piggybacking off of that, your relationship or your output that you have comes down to basically, if you want to speak in terms of science, vibrational or frequency related positioning within the body. And what I mean by that is, let me kind of back up what I mean by that. Your brain is able to generate a vibrational signal, which, if your body harnesses it correctly, can have an extreme difference on how you approach things. And you understand this frequency as emotion, as well as things like guilt, remorse, and negative emotions that kind of hold you back. Facets of that. It's very psychological and very scientific. Now, while you are on this journey, whether you are, as Rich said, whether you're religious or you're atheist, while you are on this journey, emotions in your being are not just generated by chemicals. If that were the case, then we could just hook you up to a dopamine machine and you'd be happy for the rest of your life. That's not how it works. There is a metaphysical aspect to emotions.
And in addition to that, there's evidence to suggest that we either don't understand the timing between you feeling the emotion and the chemical receptors being released.
Right.
Or, and even in a weirder sense, that it's the emotion that you feel that triggers the receptors to be put into your bloodstream, the different hormones that were originally believed to be the causers of emotion.
Yes,
it's unclear.
The modern scientific community doesn't have all the answers in that regard. However, the metaphysical scientific community, which is currently popping up, does have some answers to that. First, we can turn to Wilhelm Reich, who in the 40s, brought over from Operation Paperclip, was imprisoned and basically executed for his research on organ energy. Organ energy is similar to Kundalini energy, which is similar to the vibrational emotional response that I'm talking about within the human body. Within the human body, because our body communicates, you might perceive it as electricity. If you watched too much Jimmy Neutron as a kid, you might think, oh, well, if I'm sitting there, my brain communicates by little electrical impulses to give me thoughts and ideas. And that's necessarily true. But what people don't understand is that they can, through willpower and through thinking, through consciousness, you can actually change a lot of the different ways that you think and feel. And basically, the way that it is most easily understood is through choosing to be positive or choosing to have positive emotions. What choosing to be happy and choosing to find the glass half full compared to half empty will do is it will put your body into a high vibrational state compared to if you are, depressed, angry, sad, or bitter, or jealous, or guilt-ridden. You will be on a much more lower vibrational frequency. And you can see this just in output alone. People who are really happy, people who aren't depressed, they get more done in a day. And you can see that just, people in your own personal life. If you see somebody depressed, they're generally melancholy. They want to stay inside. They want to, sleep in their bed all day. They don't want to do much. Depressed people don't go out and make billions of dollars. It just doesn't happen. Not that it can't, but it just doesn't happen. People who are depressed generally like to claim that they're depressed and try to figure out ways in which they cannot be depressed. But ultimately, at the end of the day, unless there's some kind of external, some kind of external product that is push towards them, they generally have issues with it.
And we're not saying that it's anybody's particular fault.
No.
What we're pointing out is that if you're thinking about if your perspective is centered, as Matt said, on either being depressed, talking about being depressed, or trying to solve your problem of depression, at every stage of thought, you are still thinking primarily and focused on your depression.
Right.
So you have to approach it in a different angle. You can't come at it as with an angle of, I am depressed, how can I stop being depressed? Because you are admitting and you are thinking to yourself and reinforcing the state of mind of depression that you're already in.
Right.
So you have to turn your thought to something else. Easier said than done, I understand.
Yes.
But my point is that if you don't, you will never get better.
Right.
If you constantly are thinking to yourself, I'm just dealing with my depression, I'm struggling through it, I need to have my antidepressants, you are constantly reaffirming to yourself that your primary mode of being is depression and you have to fix it. Instead of thinking that your primary mode of being is to not be depressed and to work on other things that will get you off of that. It's about where your focus lies.
Yes, absolutely. As Earl Nightingale says, you become what you think about, and that basically stems from one of the 7 hermetic principles of mentalism, which states all is mind.
And this is also in scripture, and it's a very common saying in Dr. Carey's book, where he frequently says, I might be messing up the exact quote a little bit, but it's along the lines of, as a man thinketh in his heart, so he is.
Right. So basically what we're trying to get at is, based off of how you perceive, think, and consciously react to things in your life, it will have an outcome on the outcomes of your life. It's cause and effect. So if you go into it believing you're depressed, guess what? You're going to be depressed. Now, if you attempt to change that vibrational imprint that has been on your body, generally associated with the heartbeat. The heartbeat can determine a lot in a human being, and there are scientific facets of technology that we have today that actually read the signature of a person's quote unquote aura, or their vibrational frequency that they're outputting. They've noticed that people who are generally depressed, people who suffer from anger issues, they give off a red, orange, or yellow vibrational frequency. People who are on a higher emotional state, but also a higher activity state as well, people who are generally seen as the more intelligent people of their community, they are on a different vibrational frequency level, which is given off by a different color. And generally speaking, those colors are, such as blue and purples, possibly even rainbow. So it's interesting when you understand the science of it, because even the U.S. government, in a declassified CIA document, I believe I've stated it before in one of our previous podcasts, there was a CIA document where they were interpreting Orgone and Kundalini energy within the human body, seeing how it gets manifested, how it gets created, how it can be warped and manipulated as well through lights or sounds, vibrations, drugs, things of that nature. So even the U.S. government not only tried to hide this science, but they also have been experimenting with it for quite some time. Now, what does this tie into the sacred secretion process, right?
Yes.
The sacred secretion is a biological process that occurs in your body, in which case, if you take full advantage of it, you can basically be a walking magnet that pulls a majority of what you want from the external world to your life. Now, what do we mean by that? It looked like you wanted to say something.
So just to give you an overview of what exactly we're talking about, just very brief, as it's described by Carey. And the science on this has changed a little bit over the years as we've learned more details about our neurochemistry and the way the human body works. But basically it works like this. In your brain, it's believed to be from the claustrum, or could be the claustrum, or it could also be from your cerebellum. But at any rate, your brain secretes a substance, which we're going to call the sacred secretion. And this secretion is differentiated in your pituitary and your pineal gland, and it is given special properties, shall we say. Metaphysically, you could say they get electric and magnetic, male and female attributes, archetypal energies. Scientifically, they get their own hodgepodge of different chemicals that the body produces that are put into these different secretions. And these secretions go down. They meet in what's it's believed to be, they could go down to your coccyx, to your sacral pump, in which it's essentially supercharged, and then it begins its ascent back up. It could go to your solar plexus. It's unclear, but at any rate, it goes down your body. It begins its journey back up, and it picks up what Carey refers to as the seed or the germ. It's a somewhat physical, somewhat metaphysical, essentially germ, as he puts it, that is produced by your body, as Matt theorizes, from the spleen, and that it is baptized, if you will, protected by these differentiating the two different substances from the pineal and the pituitary gland, and it ascends back up your brain, gets there, and it goes to either goes to the hypothalamus part of your brain,
Yes.
where it remains for 2.5 to 3 days, and then it ascends to return to the father in the cerebrum at the top portion of your brain.
Yep, crucified in the skull, basically, crossing the vagus nerve, which is a cross in the neck, and then ascending to Calvary, I believe.
Calvary is traditionally Calvary is the hill on which Jesus Christ was crucified in the biblical story, and it also the original translation of the word refers to the top part of the skull, and then this takes place in the biblical story at Golgotha,
Yes.
which is another phrase which means place of the skull.
Now, what Rich is referring to and what I'm going to outright say is probably going to offend a lot of people, but we want you to know that it's not actually something that is like super set in stone. In our opinions, it's just something that is heavily believed and implied by secret societies such as the Freemasons, which is basically there are parts of the story of Jesus Christ which are analogous with the story of the sacred secretions process within the human body.
We're not saying anything about anybody's faith
Right.
or anything, but we're
Right.
pointing out that in our humble opinion, many parts of the Bible are meant to be taken allegorically
Right.
rather than literally.
Yes.
And for the record, I think somebody like Jesus probably existed, and he was probably a very cool guy.
Yes.
But that's not the point, because the point was, and the point has always been, that even the people who wrote the stories of Jesus Christ, at the time at least, did not intend for everything they wrote down to be taken as a literal historical record.
Most of the people who are responsible for writing the Bible and the passages of the Bible were believed to be Hermetists, which were based near or around Alexandria, Egypt, where the Library of Alexandria was. This is history, and Hermeticism actually plays a big part in the creation of the modern Christian Bible.
As does Gnosticism.
As does Gnosticism.
And of course, it's always interesting to find out that these same groups have very little to say on the matter at the time that they were around, because they were, of course, brutally killed, suppressed, and all of their knowledge taken, burned, or forced to be hidden.
And this is an understanding of not only secret societies and their interpretations of religions and cultures all throughout the world for the last couple thousand years, but this is also interpretations from religions that had popped up that were fanatically, overwhelmingly popular, and then were eventually, snuffed out, basically, by more militarized religious groups.
And so you might be, of course, one of the first things to point out is that this process that we just described from Dr. Carey, this is more of a best way to think of it is like a framework. Because truthfully, we don't know for fact, like first this, then like a step-by-step process.
Right.
However, we believe it to be true because all of the steps in the process, at least 95% of them, do happen. They do have a scientific basis in your body.
Yes.
If you basically go by the rules of the book for what you should do with these scientific processes by the people that believe in the sacred secretion, there is literally no way that it can be a detriment to your health. So, for example, the things that harm this process are excess eating, lack of exercise, poor social behavior, excess drinking,
Alcohol.
Alcohol's a biggie.
Masturbation.
I would, what would you call it? Not casting value judgment on anybody here, but as they would put it, improper sex practice.
Yes.
And essentially giving into your lower base mind and your pleasure-based impulses.
Yes.
All of these things
Carnal desires.
will destroy the seed and the process. What's interesting is that this is not a unique thing for any one religious faith or group.
Right.
And you have to ask yourself, at a certain point, yes, these things can and have been used for the purposes of control over individuals. However, then you have to ask yourself the question, if that is just the case and it's purely that, then why have some of the best, brightest, and universally acclaimed individuals in history lived by these same principles, and it seemed to be very beneficial for them?
Right, and to go off of that point, some of the things that Rich is referring to are, for example, the number 7. 7 is a very important number for many cultures around the world. But
chakras,
planets, the 7 deadly sins, the 7 trumpets of the angels of Revelations, things like that. And also 7 days in a week, right? 7 is a very important number. 7 wandering planets, as Rich said, is based off of the current 7-day per week calendar system that we have today. I can't speak for some reason, but excuse me. The purpose of bringing this up is there's also 7 colors of a 7 color spectrum, 7 colors that we see in a rainbow. And these 7 colors each correlate specifically with a different chakra if you look at the chakra system from Hinduism. Now, why is that important? What does that have to do with the sacred secretion? Well, the solar plexus area of the body, the solar plexus chakra, also known as the spleen chakra, is said to be where the germ, the Christ seed, is created. The Naja seed, or the Krishna seed.
And this part varies a little bit. Matt theorizes it's the spleen. Some people theorize that it's born legitimately in the solar plexus.
Right.
Carey had a theory that near your solar plexus region, you actually have a little tiny thimble-shaped depression, and that he believed that this is the equivalent of the manger where Jesus is born, because the 2 main reasons are, one, it would resemble something like a cave, and if you actually look at the traditional biblical translations, it's more likely that Jesus wasn't born in an actual like a stable, but something like a grotto, or a cavern, something more similar to that, which reflects in this thimble-shaped depression. The second point is, and I think Carey really made a good point here with this, is that Jesus is born in Bethlehem, and that the literal translation of Bethlehem is house of bread, which is your stomach. And the fact that bread is not just reference to food, but that especially in religious scripture, and especially the Bible, bread frequently has a metaphorical, deeply metaphysical meaning, especially when it comes to Jesus talking about bread and referring to himself as the bread of life, this sort of thing. It does not refer to literal bread or even food at all. It refers to a substance that provides a sort of metaphysical or soul nourishment, if you will.
Now, this is the reason why I theorize it's the spleen, for a number of reasons. One is the anatomy of the spleen, and I'll get into that later. One is the anatomy. Another is Manly P. Hall and Thomas Burgoyne both state that the spleen is required in the process of basically keeping the vibrational frequency within the body consistent. And the reason for that is because of the anatomy of the spleen. Furthermore, we know that the spleen, its function is to basically be one of the main headquarters of the lymphatic system, or most people know as the immune system of the body. So the spleen actually generates, the spleen is the main organ, if you don't look at bones, because it's not an organ. The spleen is the main organ that generates plasma and white blood-based cells within the body. Plasma, if you want to take the ancient secret society interpretation of fire, earth, water, and air, and then just translate it to what the modern scientific community rebrands it, as they always do, with solids, liquids, and gases, there's a fourth concept which is known as plasma or energy in the science community. And that is basically akin to the fire aspect of the original ancient antiquity secret societies. Fire being the closest element to God, whereas earth being, the one that's furthest away. Fire in relation to energy and plasma. These things all correspond with the spleen. because the spleen is seated right between the heart and the stomach. So if you overeat, it puts pressure on the spleen, which makes it harder for the spleen to do its function, which is why people who are gluttonous and why people who are generally obese also suffer from the highest from illnesses. So overeating is linked to illnesses, I believe, because overeating is linked to putting pressure on the spleen, which makes it harder for it to do its job. The spleen also has a lot of different plasma cells that it creates, some of which it needs cells from the thymus gland and other parts of the body in order to accomplish its goals. But one of the things I find very interesting about the spleen is a concept called affinity maturation, where basically white blood cells and plasma cells are able to manipulate and change DNA within the body, which I think is very interesting, because I think that plays a big role in the generation of the Christ seed. Also, the anatomy of the spleen. The anatomy, real quick, is 75% red pulp, which is red blood cells mainly, and then there's a white pulp. And this white pulp is made almost entirely of white cells. And the way that it looks, it has little follicles, which kind of look like, if you look at the white pulp, it looks like a tree. It looks like branches with little follicles of a tree on the white pulp. And it is within these follicles, it is within these little fruits off of the little tree-like anatomy of the spleen that create these special plasma cells which go throughout our body and heal ourselves, such as white blood cells. So the spleen plays a major role. And also, if you look up scientifically, people who have removed or partially removed spleens have much, much, much higher chances of getting sick. They have a much more weakened immune system. This is science. We're talking about science here. So even though a lot of people think the spleen is useless, I think that's just a psychological operation. I think it's a lie. And that's why I believe it plays a pivotal role in the process. Now, I could be wrong, and Dr. Carey, who's an actual doctor, could be completely right.
But we both could be right.
Or we both could be right. But the point is that...
or we all could be wrong.
or we all could be wrong. But that's kind of the conversation we want to bring up, because there's so many things that point to the government trying to dig research into this biological process and the harnessing of this energy within the human body, and yet they won't openly talk about it. I mean, just the fact that the symbol for this process is the caduceus, which is the staff with the two snakes winding around it and the enlightened wings at the top. The medical industry uses this symbol all the time.
And you can bet your butt that is the Kundalini.
Yeah.
You're going to sit there and you're going to try to tell me that staff, the two snakes wrapping around it, which, by the way, DNA, hello.
Yeah.
If you're going to tell me that with the wings at the top, and the wings always symbolize enlightenment, being above, and that's where and it's at the top, right where the head is. If you're going to tell me that all of that does not resemble at all the Kundalini, the two snakes wrapping around the central channel, the Sushumna,
the spine,
in tantric Hindu mythology and philosophy. If you're going to tell me that, you're full of shit.
Right, because that's exactly where they got that symbol from.
Those two things are related, and and we're not saying that one took it from the other, or that it's the same thing and somebody just took it and gave it a different name.
Right.
More so, the point is they have the same sorts of ideas, and they're constantly going back and forth, and that should tell you that there's an underlying degree of truth.
Right.
If two cultures came up with the idea of you having a central channel in your body, where energy ascends, and you have two different other channels on either side of it that represent the positive and the negative, the yin, the yang, and that by doing something important, special, and specific with these channels, you can bring it to the top of your head and attain enlightenment. If all different cultures around the world have something like that, you cannot ignore that, and it really makes you wonder, what were they onto? Because they were obviously onto something,
right?
And you have to admit, you either have to go against the historical record that says that these cultures, separated by vast distances in geography, didn't really have much interaction with each other, and yet they could find out the deepest, most secret, important aspects of their philosophy and religion.
Right.
So you either have to completely go against the historical record and say that no, they were actually in contact with each other frequently and they were talking about this stuff, or you have to admit that somehow, some way, through collective consciousness or a unique penetrative gaze into the truth of the universe, they were able to both come up with a scarily similar concept and idea, not only in terms of structure, but in terms of what you get out of it.
Right.
Because that's the other thing too, is that no culture has something like the Kundalini and says that basically if you're a deplorable piece of scum and you take everything that you want from everybody and you pay no mind to nature around you, will you attain godhood? No fucking culture is saying these things.
No.
And if any group starts to say these things, I can promise you the rest of the society turns on them very quickly because people don't like that sort of thing.
Right. So that's a really good link into what I wanted to discuss, to follow up on the sacred secretion, is basically there are a bunch of different theories and there are a bunch of different ways in which we can interpret and explain it, a bunch of different mythologies and a bunch of different stories. But we're going to leave some of that to you guys to figure out, because we could sit here for hours and talk about it, but what we really want to talk about is what it is and how you can harness it, I guess, because we've been talking about making a video on that for a while, and we will, but we might as well give you some information on this now. So this is basically the practical sense of how you can utilize the sacred secretion within your body, okay? Now, the first thing that we should start is the theory of timing. This is probably the thing that we are the least knowledgeable on, is the timing. Theoretically, this process runs in your body all the time. Theoretically. Now, if you talk with Dr. Carey, he says that the Christ seed, the germ that is specifically required to bring up into your brain in order to create the chemical response that would put pressure on from the interior of your brain to essentially flex your mind by pushing back the fulcrum. That's what this process does. We should probably start there. What does the process do, Matt? Like goddamn, just get to the fucking point, you ignoramus. Okay. By utilizing the sacred secretion process, if you do it properly, you will not only be happier, you can get rid of things such as depression, you can cure your negative emotional ails, but it also basically flexes your brain like if you were working out, okay? And the reason that it's important is because it will extend your life, it will make you live a longer, happier, more fulfilled life, but also, in a cosmic sense, if you want to interpret the energetic vibrational imprint patterns and the different kind of metaphysical science behind it, you will basically be more of a walking magnet of the things that you want in your life. Okay, so if you've ever read this, New York Times best-selling book, it's called The Secret. A lot of people have read it, especially people who are a little bit older, maybe like Gen X. A lot of people got hooked on it because it basically discusses the law of attraction. Okay, and the law of attraction is real. That's something that you have to understand. Everybody who's rich, everybody who has an obscene amount of money that came from nowhere that aren't child actors, they'll tell you that they had to utilize basically the law of attraction. Some people will say, I just believed in myself. Some people will say, well, I had to motivate myself every day. I had to stay positive, blah, blah, blah. That's called the law of attraction. Being able to utilize the willpower within your body to consistently remain focused, positive, and geared on a set specific goal is how you accomplish that goal. There's not going to be somebody who accomplishes such a major goal, like, for example, going to Mars, like Elon Musk. There's no way Elon Musk could sit in his bed all day and eat candy bars and be depressed and complain about how miserable his life is and also get to Mars. It's not going to happen. He has to basically live in the mindset that he has already gotten to Mars to break down how he's going to get there. And it's the same as, prayer, wisdom, casting a spell, meditating, things of that nature. So by utilizing your mind, your brain, the brain that God gave you, the conscious brain, you can actually not only draw up energy in the sense of blood flow, but also emotions. You can draw up energy into your mind to basically be a walking beacon, be a walking cell tower, a walking radio tower, which draws in different things around you that you want, like a magnet, and can also assist in repelling things that you don't want because you create a spiritual barrier that is, exponentially more powerful than one if you were constantly negative all the time. Now, here's the thing about enlightenment that is, kind of difficult for a lot of people to understand. You can't just eat whatever you crave. You can't just fuck whoever you want all the time whenever you want it. You can't just be angry and bitter and jealous and envious and rageful and wrathful.
You actually absolutely can. You can
Yeah.
totally go for this stuff and let us know how it works out for
But
you.
you're really not going to achieve enlightenment if you want to go down that path.
You're not going to be fulfilled.
Right. You're not going to find fulfillment.
It will catch up with you.
And it will catch up with you in a karmic sense, because you bring the things to you that you put out.
We're getting really biblical here, and
Right.
so I'm going to drop another bit of scripture, but it also goes back to Earl Nightingale in his book, The Strangest Secret. He frequently says, and this is some real freaking wisdom here, right? I understand that people have differing opinions on the Bible. I totally get it. It's a very complicated book, very complicated history. But right there in the Bible when it says, as you reap, so you shall sow.
As you sow, so shall you reap. Yeah.
Whoops.
Yes.
Whoops.
That's all right.
As you sow, as you sow, so shall ye reap.
Yes.
There is some real, true wisdom there, and if you read that and all you can come across is, sorry.
No, I get what you're saying.
If you read that and all you can gather from that is that it's obvious, or that it's a quaint little bit of scripture or something like that, then you're really missing what it's actually trying to get at, which is whatever you put out into the universe will come back to you.
Right.
And it just doesn't really have anything to do in terms of like a divine karmic plan, or that justice will come for you. That's not what we're talking about, although it's kind of like that. It's just the factual observation that if you do bad acts will come back to you.
Yes.
It is just the way it happens.
I've witnessed people die in my lifetime from karma.
And this happens in various ways too. So you might think like, well, like here's a bit of a morbid example, but you think, oh well, if you do bad things, it's going to come back to you. And you think, well, that's nice, but why doesn't it happen sooner? Why doesn't it happen immediately? Well, maybe it's the scope. So even you could say, well, that whole law of if you put evil out there, evil is going to happen to you. That doesn't really seem to work with somebody as evil as, like, say, Hitler. And you might think, well, yeah, I guess that's true, because he was able to live for so long and do so many horrible things. But then you think, okay, but let's look at that now.
Yeah, 100 years later, and everybody hates the guy still.
Do you think he's won? Do you think he really won? Do you think he really didn't have anything come back to bite him, or his memory, or his legacy?
Everybody most people know him on the face of the planet, and most people hate him on the face of the planet. That's generally what happened with him. And the same sense goes for anything. And
if you look at his case too, that didn't have anything to do with some sort of divine agent of justice coming down and telling us about how evil he was.
Right.
That was us.
Right.
We held a trial. We looked at evidence. We came to a determination about the history of what had happened.
Right.
And the point there is that it comes back for you. You can believe it. And you can also believe that that goes for everybody and every time. And you can look at what's going on right now. And I promise you, there are people out there that are playing games with the world and with the people in it because they think they are gods. They are not, and they will pay for what they do.
And that is life on this planet.
You cannot escape this law.
You cannot escape it. I mean, if you want to understand the ticket to heaven, there is no one piece of advice. But if I were to boil it down, it's basically the ancients believed that if you weren't living in your mind, and you weren't living with the majority of your energy seated within your brain, specifically within the mid-center of your brain towards the pineal, which they believe to be the door to God, okay? If you don't have the energy there, then when you die, your energy has no other alternative than your soul basically has no other alternative but to stay here, which would be hell or purgatory. And heaven, which comes from the term heaved up, means going back to the one or the all or God or the universe. The source. Leaving the earth, which is essentially a physical prison in a sense. Now, it's a beautiful physical prison, but it's also one in which we're stuck. We can't really leave unless we die. And if we die and we're enlightened, we will leave. That's basically the thought processes there when it comes to why the sacred secretion is important. And we're not saying that, do this and you'll get to heaven, because we don't know. But
do this and there's nothing. Like, look, what we're describing and the acts we're describing is like, forget the process, forget the sources and everything. What do the people who would follow this process, what do they say to do?
Yeah.
And it's simple collection of things basically. And it's don't be a dick.
Right.
Do your version of prayer. Do your version of meditation. And be very particular and active and willful in your thinking. Don't be lazy with your thinking. Get your thoughts under control. And if you do those things, it doesn't. We could be completely wrong. I don't think we are. I really don't think we are. But we could be completely wrong, and this entire process could not exist. If you do those things, please explain to me how those things will have a net negative impact on your life.
They won't.
So they never will.
Right. So let's so the timing, I think what we were talking about to talk about the sacred secretion process and getting back on track with it, what we were talking about was the timing is the thing that's generally most misunderstood, at least from our perspective, because if you ask somebody like Carrie, he'll say that it happens once a month. It could happen all the time. My philosophy is, and this is the one that I'm starting to incorporate more in my life, is I want to spend more and more time focused on it rather than spending, just a couple of days a month or a week. Now, when we made our previous videos in the past, two of which are very popular, discussing the sacred secretion, we were saying about roughly once a month. Now, that's just the science from people who have been within the last 100 years.
When the seed is specifically born.
Right. So what am I trying to get at? Well, you have all this literature and all these talking points from people who were quoting, members of antiquity and secret societies in the late 1800s and the early 1900s who were discussing the importance of this. Then, timeline-wise, around the 1940s, after World War II, you had all these people who were hushed. The 50s, the CIA and the FBI get involved. And now we've had very, very little information on it, but the government is still performing, experiments in correlation with this. So there has to be some layer of truth there. But that being said, with this process, I want to tell you what it is, when you can take advantage of it, according to the mystics and the ancients, and then what you have to do, as Rich was getting at, things that are in no way, shape, or form harmful to the individual.
Only beneficial.
Only beneficial. And then how, basically what kind of schedule and what kind of practices you should take into it, right? Okay, so let's get into it, and we'll try to make this, semi-brief, but it won't be. So just be prepared. All right. The timing apparently theorized to be when, basically the placement of the moon. Why would the placement of the moon be important? Well, like I stated before, if the moon can control the tides and mating patterns and a whole bunch of other crap for not only the Earth, but also for animals and plants, then it definitely has an impact on human beings.
It's also frequently mentioned by the ancients to be both a mirror of the energy of the sun and, to a lesser extent, all of the cosmos, as well as a portal to whatever you would want to call it. Gods, deities, angels,
right.
extra dimensional beings, what have you.
Right. So the moon, in theory, is what begins this process. And I want to bring it back to another point that I brought up earlier, which was how the moon is linked to a woman's fertility cycle. We know that there were scientific studies in the 60s done stating that women who were not on birth control could sync up their cycle with the moon by an accuracy of 98%. They just didn't know how to measure it because, of course, this is hidden information. So if we know that the moon has an influence on humans, the theory still stands that it could also have an influence on the sacred secretion process. So, with that being said, the moon goes through one of the 12 vectors of the sky that we call the zodiac, okay? The zodiac, again, 360 degrees around the Earth, broken into 12-degree sectors of 30 degrees each. 12 sectors of 30 degrees each, for a total of 360 degrees, okay? So when the moon takes roughly about 3 days to travel through each one. It's a cycle of about 28 days. I think it's 2.3 days per, but then you also have to remember that, the moon kind of overlaps. So roughly 3 days, okay? Every roughly 3 days, the moon's in a different sign. Start experimenting with that and see how people act and react to things when the moon is in a specific sign. You might actually see that there is a correlation because the mystics all used to state that the moon controls the mind. So, again, that's just a mystical interpretation. It's an ancient interpretation. But I have noticed that when the moon is in a sign such as Scorpio or Aries, which is ruled by Mars, people can be a little more abrasive. I've noticed that when it's in something like Taurus or Cancer, people are a little more, I guess, feminine, you could say. People are a little more open to being oriented towards family. So these are just little observations that I have made personally. Take it as anecdotal evidence, but use it in your own interpretations. So start tracking the phases of the moon because that's important, okay? So supposedly, presumably, when the moon is in your sign of birth. So what that means is if you were born in July, between June 21st and July 21st, you would be designated as a Cancer sign. If you were born from July 21st to August 21st, you would be a Leo sign. Now that's called your sun sign. That's because it is based off of the month, roughly 30 days or so, where the sun was in front of that sign. So if it's, for example, it's July right now, so the sun is in front of the Cancer constellation. Technically, it's in front of the Gemini constellation, but that's another story. From the traditional zodiacal sense, it's in front of the Cancer constellations, which is why if you're born under the month of July, generally, if it's not past the 21st, you're known as a Cancer sign. When the moon would enter Cancer, that is when, for you, this process would undergo. The caveat to this, and this is Thomas H. Burgoyne's interpretation from The Light of Egypt, he says that for a woman specifically, it's when she is going through her period cycle. Now, again, there's not enough scientific evidence on our end. We don't work for the government. We don't have, mass amounts of funding to be able to perform these operations. I would assume that if this exists, there's tangible evidence of it that's being kept somewhere safe in a vault. Because if people could learn how to do this, it would cause a mass amount of problems for the people in power. Because basically the general population would become more enlightened. They would stop focusing so heavily on materialism. They would focus more on spirituality. And materialism is the power of those who are in power. Basically constructing a material-based world where people are forced to get jobs, et cetera, rather than all of us giving to a community and working towards a collective goal. We're all basically in competition with each other. So a group of enlightened individuals would be a very scary thing for those in power, which is why they don't want us to know about this process. Now, when the moon theoretically is in your sun sign, that is when the claustrum of your brain will receive the energetic vibrational signal to tell the pineal and the pituitary and the different other aspects of your body to start this process. Now, that is what Dr. Carey said. That's what Kelly Marie Kerr agrees with. Santos Bonacci, Thomas Burgoyne, Manly P. Hall. A lot of them state similar things. However, it could also be taken that this process is a constantly undergoing thing as your body constantly heals itself, and maybe the influence of the moon isn't as important, and in which case you should just take it at face value to do these things that we're about to tell you in order to harness this power. You could do them all the time, and there really wouldn't be a backlash. You should always have fun with your life. I don't recommend going the path of sitting under a tree and meditating for 40 days and 40 nights straight.
You don't have to be some strict ascetic monk where you have to go out into the wilderness and shun society. And
although that is what they do, the Tibetan and the Himalayan monks who have their secret orders, they practice this process. That's what they're doing. That's why they remove themselves from a material world and they go to an elevated place up in a mountain, away from the lower sectors of society, and they harness the power of the sacred secretional process, the Kundalini energy. That's what they're doing up there.
Now, of course, not all of us have the time, the resources, or the drive to do it in quite that way.
Yes.
People have families. People have
other goals and aspirations.
They have other goals and aspirations. They have partners, and of course, it's just, at least if you want to stick where we are right now in the continental America, sort of joining a potentially sketchy group or cult, or joining, we don't even have a monastery, so you can't even do that. Short of doing something like that, there's really not much you could do, because it's almost impossible to live off the grid, and the only thing that you could really do to do something like that would be to go out and just live in the wilderness, which I wouldn't recommend.
Right.
And at some point, you would probably run into some sort of trouble with the federal authorities, because even wild land isn't wild land. It's owned by somebody.
Right. So there's really no way for you to do that in America modernly. I mean, you could, I guess.
Or a lot of developed nations, really.
Right. I mean, if you had a lot of money, you could buy a house and just be completely left alone. Hire somebody to do all your taxes and keep all that stuff at bay. But the point we're getting at is it's very difficult, and it's been made difficult so that it's harder for you to get these things accomplished. Now,
so we have to do the best of what we got.
Right. So this is what we recommend. We recommend if you're going to go through the process, and I definitely have dabbled and experimented and experienced a lot with the sacred secretion process. I would give it a week, 1 week of every month, where you dedicate the entire week to the process itself. And you take it day by day, step by step. One of my friends on YouTube, she runs Arc Channel on YouTube, good friend of ours. She recommends basically taking a week approach as well, in which you focus on one aspect of the chakra system, starting from the root chakra all the way to the crown chakra for each day of the week. So the first day, in other words, Maslow's hierarchy of needs psychologically corresponds with the chakra, so you could look at it that way. But the root chakra, based in security and safety and feeling comfortable and safe, that one you could focus on for one day, in which case you could thank God for feeling safe and having the things that you have. The second day you'd focus on the second chakra, which is the I believe the sacral chakra, and then you just basically would go from there and you'd move up the scale. Now the reason I recommend doing that is because it gives you more time basically to try to be with God, and it might be hard for a lot of people because essentially what you have to avoid are the 7 deadly sins. You have to avoid drinking, and you have to avoid the sexual aspects of your nature. You have to avoid saying and doing things that could result in negative energies coming back to harm you. It's things like that. But if you take those 7 days, I think that it'll work. So now you have a time frame, basically a week of every month you want to dedicate to self-improvement and self-betterment. That's the way you want to see it, right? And if you do that, I mean, think about, that's 12 weeks out of the year, 12 weeks out of 52 weeks in a year. That's a good portion of time that you're taking to kind of find your path and try to be with God. And you can absolutely do this by juggling it with a job. You can absolutely do this by juggling it with, whatever else you got going on. Because really, you don't need that much time. But this is what happens. So, according to Dr. Carey and other sources, the claustrum of your brain signals your body to undergo this healing process, okay? And what happens is the pineal and the pituitary create separate chemicals. I theorize the spleen and or the solar plexus also does. And it is also potentially possible that something within your sacrum is also generated, created, or something is given from the sacrum. But basically, these two chemicals from your brain go all the way down to your sacrum. They combine, and then they come up the spinal column through meditation, through prayer, through exercise, through love, through feeling those high vibrations and trying to be at one with God, at one with the universe. This pool of chemical combinations is brought up. It picks up that germ that is created in the solar plexus, presumably the spleen or whatever else. And then once it goes up into the brain, it sits in the thalamus, in the little cave. And for 3 days at the very least, it has to sit there, and it has to... the way that I understand the chemical composite, basically the combination is... It basically works like yeast. You put a couple of chemicals together, and then yeast will begin to rise on its own. And if you do that within the brain, what it does is that it basically puts so much pressure from the inside of the brain that it flexes the brain so that the dormant brain cells, and trust me, you've probably heard the statistic 11% or something like that of the brain is utilized, and that's true, but this process allows you to increase that number. Think of it that way. I can't tell you what kind of ratio, I can't tell you how much it's going to increase, but it basically increases the capacity of the brain. So when you put the pressure on the brain from the inside from this chemical combination, it pushes back a part of the interior of the brain called the fulcrum. And once it does that, it essentially flexes the brain so that blood is flowing. CSF cerebrospinal fluid gets generated and created. CSF is an extremely important chemical because it's utilized in your sexual reproductive fluids. It's utilized by your spleen for creating plasma cells. It's utilized by your bone marrow for creating white blood cells and red blood cells as well. So CSF is basically the liquid in which your body uses to convert into different cells of your body. So it is the lifeblood. It's not even blood. It's a lifeblood, though. Think about it that way. So that gives you the basic interpretation of what it is. So how do you utilize it? This is what you do. Okay. This is what I do. Actually, I should say that because I'm not going to tell you what to do with your life. You do whatever you want to do, but I'm going to tell you what I do, and then if you want to practice it, you can. And I should preface, I've had a lot of very strange out-of-body experiences. You remember the first time I actually activated it, I was driving to your house, Rich, and
right.
I came to your door and I said, yo, something's going on, feel me, and you told me I was vibrating.
Yes, you felt like you were buzzing. You told me that you were feeling that internally and externally.
Yes, and it was a very odd feeling. I almost crashed the car because I was like totally not focused on driving. It was a hour-long trip, and I was sort of in a trance meditating while I was driving, just trying to relax, breathe, trying to harness the energy, and I felt it. And that's when I felt it. And then I asked him if he could just touch me and feel it, and he claims that I was buzzing. I felt that as well. And that
right there is purely anecdotal.
Anecdotal.
But the point that we're trying to make is that you will experience something.
Yes.
It's probably going to be unique to you, and don't worry so much about trying to analyze what that something is, at least not in the moment.
Right.
It's much more beneficial to go with the flow, so to speak, and to just observe the sensation that you may or may not be having.
Right.
And that goes for meditation and any sort of strange internal peace that may come over you, or bursts of energy that you get, or what have you.
Right.
Don't worry about what does this mean, is this real, am I psyching myself up or out. Don't worry about any of that. Just
at the
observe.
at the end of the day, you're bettering yourself, and that's what the whole process is for, right? So this is what I recommend. Okay. First of all, I should absolutely address the differences between men and women. Because I have found by talking with a lot of my female colleagues and friends that it might be a little bit different for them. Okay. If you're a woman who is not on birth control, and that's important because you have to basically do this process whilst on your period. And with the women, I can just get it out of the way because the period timing is super easy. If you're on your period, it is theorized that is when this process takes place. If you want to go from the approach, and that's only by Thomas Burgoyne, by the way, but if you want to go on the approach that the process works similarly between men and women, then do it the same way that I'm about to describe it for men. For men, you need to start looking at the moon because, well, actually, both men and women. But for the men, if you're trying to understand this cycle, you need to look at the moon, and here's why. You're going to have two different types of calendar systems that tell you when the moon is in which sign. There's traditional and there's sidereal. Traditional is basically from the Earth's perspective. Sidereal is basically from the planetary objects perspective. Now, what I mean by that is traditional is going to tell you the same time, basically, all throughout it's kind of harder to put it in terms like that, but basically traditional is what the planet mainly feels, the energy that the planet mainly feels, and sidereal is where the planetary objects are actually seated. The difference being angles and interpretations and the way that we receive cosmic radiation. But I won't get into the scientific mumbo jumbo. This is what you got to do. Okay, practical. Look at where the moon is. If you want to use a traditional system, that's fine. Look at where the moon is. So right now, the traditional system would say, let's just theorize if it would say the moon is in Aries. Let's say that you are in Aries. Let's say your birthday was April 1st. Okay, we're just going to go real basic here. Your birthday is April 1st. All right. And the moon is about to be in Aries. Okay, well, first of all, you have to wait until the moon is in the sign before, which is Pisces. Okay, the reason is because you need to give your body ample time to prepare for this process. You can't just start the process when it's starting, because that would kind of defeat the whole purpose of the sacrificial element. So you want to give it 3 days for preparation. You want to give it 3 days for the process itself, and then you want to give it 1 extra day at the end of the process as a rest, like how God created God created the world in 7 days, and on the last day He rested. You take that approach, okay? The first 3 days are going to be when the moon is in the sign before your sun sign. So if you were born April 1st and you're in Aries, and the moon is in Pisces, right when the moon goes into Pisces, that's when you want to start preparing. And that's at the latest, all right? You might even want to do it a couple days before that. So then you wait those 3 days, okay, while the moon is in Pisces, because it goes Pisces and then it goes to Aries. So the 3 days is for preparation, and then the 3 days where the moon is in Aries is the days that the combination of chemicals is going to sit in your brain. And then the last day is to give yourself a buffer day, okay? 7 days. And this is what you're going to do during these 7 days. Every single day. You're going to exercise by doing cardio, all right? At least a little bit. If you're a guy and you want to do weightlifting, if you're a girl and you want to do squats or whatever, yeah, sure, go for it. But you're going to need probably at least 15, 20 minutes of exercise each one of those days. Your diet is extremely important. No sugar, no caffeine, no alcohol. You have to remain a certain level of alkalinity. And what that means is a certain pH level in your body. Because if your body is too acidic, so if you eat too much dairy, if you eat too much sugar, if you consume too much alcohol, your body will become acidic, and if it's acidic, it will become very lower vibrationally frequent, like very lower in vibrations, which will affect the process of this chemical combination. Because that's basically what it is. It's the vibrational frequency that you have in your body determines whether or not this chemical composition is either going to be able to survive and doesn't dissolve, or even if you're able to bring it up in the first place. So what you eat is extremely, extremely important. You want to go for alkaline foods, blueberries, spinach, kale, salads, For those 7 days, I would eat meat maybe once or twice that week.
Stay away from highly processed sugary stuff.
Yeah, no sugar. Absolutely no sugar.
It's horrible for you.
It's very bad. And the reason is because sugar assists in calcifying the pineal gland, same with caffeine, and same with alcohol, and same with tobacco.
And that's aside from all the fun mainstream stuff like diabetes, heart disease, increased levels of fat.
Right.
Oh my God, it goes on.
Right. So you already know that stuff's bad for you. So your diet is very important. Now, I'm not saying that you have to eat like raw kale for 7 days straight. I'm saying don't eat a lot of sugary stuff. Don't consume a lot of coffee. Don't eat a lot of chocolate. All right. Don't overeat either. You want to be light. You want to be light and fluffy and full of air and energy.
The bad foods, and especially overeating, which Dr. Carey talks quite a bit about, is not only in extreme cases, this is actually kind of interesting, but in extreme cases of overeating and overconsumption of alcohol, you can essentially have more or less, I guess you can think of it as, this is probably very scientific, but a sort of sludge buildup in your body of just stuff that your body is taking time to fully get rid of. And this can ferment, and you can actually have small amounts of alcohol develop in your body as the result of its bodily processes. There's actually a thing that's called auto-intoxication, as Carey calls it. I think the modern day phrase that they usually use is, I think they use auto-intoxication. One of the main things is called gut brewery syndrome. Now, this isn't very common, but the point that we're making is that, one, overeating and overindulging in alcohol and food can lead to this, and it also naturally makes your body more acidic. And an acidic body is not a happy body. and it's much more difficult to cultivate this this substance, this Jesus seed, if you will, and also just to keep yourself healthier. Your body has a very specific pH balance that likes to keep it at, but it prefers to be more alkaline than acidic.
Yeah, 7.3 to 7.4 I think is the range.
And this is also why, if you ever notice, after you have a particularly large meal, or even if you have something that's particularly fatty or particularly acidic, you'll notice
lethargy,
and it's not just a sense of, I'm so stuffed, I don't want to move. That's definitely a part of it.
Right.
But even when you don't have that and you're not completely stuffed, you'll notice that your brain just feels kind of groggy. It kind of feels like it's in a fog. It does feel very lethargic. It's difficult if you just had a big lunch, or even just a very acidic lunch, or a not so great lunch. It's hard for you to leave the lunch table and then pick up like a very intellectually stimulating book.
Yeah.
And to dedicate yourself and be like, let's get to this. It's
you start falling
much
asleep.
harder.
You start falling asleep. I mean, really, you get the itis.
Definitely.
Yeah.
But it's not just a result of, is it commonly thought, I'm so full, I don't want to move. That's definitely a part of it. But even when you don't eat to that capacity, if it's highly acidic or if it's not the best foods, you'll still get that effect. And that's what it's from.
Right. So diet is absolutely crucial, and we'll leave it off on that one. I personally like to have a pretty good mixed diet of fruits, nuts, vegetables for that week. Nuts are really, really, really good at maintaining your level of protein. And then you don't want to overeat on fruits because they'll have a lot of sugar, but you should absolutely get your fruit game on during that week. So diet is important. Meditation, also very important. I recommend that you do 20 to 30 minutes of meditation, as well as yoga, because you need to be able to stretch and get your spine and different aspects of your body aligned and blood flowing and ready to be able to be a host for this chemical brewery of sexual alchemy combinations. You must not masturbate or have negative sexual, what did you call it? Negative, it was something like negative sexual actions or something like that.
What was it? Negative sexual practices?
Yeah.
And look, we're not casting judgment on anybody. We're not going to sit here and be like, don't have sex before marriage, blah, blah, blah.
No, we're not talking about anything like that.
We're saying is that first of all, just in our humble opinion, in our personal outlook on life, we are of the opinion that if you are going to engage in sexual intercourse with another person, whoever that may be, that it should, to us, mean something. And we're not saying that you're doing it with somebody that's going to be your life partner. We simply mean that, one, you should have some sort of meaningful relationship with the other individual, and that, two, you should, in our opinion, not saying for fact, but you should not view sex as merely an action to take for pleasure and fun with another person.
Right. The Kama Sutra from India is actually a very good book on how you can manipulate Kundalini sex alchemy, where you can do different positions and different breathing techniques and different ways to connect with your partner in order to harness more energy. But one of their big facets that they talk about is if you're a man and you're trying to harness the energy, you must not finish. That's a big aspect of it.
You want to hold, because in their mind, the final act of orgasm and also the sexual substance of especially the semen, like the egg is sort of talked about, but again, they didn't know for a fact the anatomy inside the womb of the development of the child. But the point is that they recognized that the man had some sort of sexual substance and the woman had some sort of sexual substance to create the child. And because they didn't have the same opinions regarding sexuality and sex in general that we do now, the primary goal and focus and central point of sexual intercourse was specifically to create a child to further society.
It was a lot more special back then than it is now.
So we're not saying that it has to have the same focus or point or end game, but we're saying that the meaning should still be there, because whether you want to admit it or not, again, not to be sexist, we're not experts, but especially for women, the nature, the chemistry, and the physicality of sex has deep emotional ramifications.
Yes.
Whether it's then, whether it's later, whether you want to willingly admit it or not. It goes for men too. It goes for people. You cannot just go through life constantly engaging in sexual intercourse with people and not have it affect your mental or emotional state. That is ludicrous.
It's been scientifically proven that it doesn't work that way. You can't just have a bunch of sexual partners and believe that it doesn't have any effect on you.
So what we're saying is, if we know that it has a deep impact on you, and if we know that this act is linked to very important cultural and scientific facts and aspects of life, then perhaps if you're going to engage in this activity, you should do so with I don't want to say reverence, because that's not quite the right word, but at least a knowledge and a respect for it.
Yeah.
It would be a better way of viewing it.
Yes.
Because also, again, there's this misconception that the people who encouraged proper sex practices, that it was strictly a measure and a manner of control, and it was because they wanted to repress people. But that's not the full story. And then in actuality, a lot of these sages, and especially the people in the secret societies and the mystery schools that were using this as a form of quote unquote sexual alchemy, it was because they recognized that, truthfully, sexual intercourse between two people who have a bond and who have some form of love for one another is actually a very beautiful and meaningful thing for the people to do.
Yeah.
That was always the emphasis, hence the Kama Sutra. They didn't do that because they wanted all these different positions, as it's been bastardized now, to have the most fun and to get the biggest bang at the end of it.
Right.
It was because they recognized that these different positions impacted your internal body energies in such a way, and they affected the metaphorical, emotional energy of the act of sex.
Yes. And going off of that is why, if you're single, you don't have to worry about having a partner, but you do have to worry still about, basically releasing certain fluids from your body. And what we recommend is that you don't do that. You basically hold off. You take that week to remain somewhat celibate, somewhat abstinent. I've had it where, I know that you can absolutely practice sexual things, but they have to be a lot more meaningful and special, and they absolutely cannot result in orgasm during that week, for the man specifically.
And put more conscious effort into just taking notice and paying attention to the things if you're going to do them. That's really what we're saying. Pay attention to them. Don't just do them because you're going through the motions.
Right. I personally, I personally recommend not doing anything that week, but I know that you can also harness power through specific acts, and I'm not going to go into too much detail, but there are a bunch of different opinions on that, but ultimately the same correlating opinion is do not ejaculate. It's basically the overarching message.
And that is primarily geared more towards men in that in that discussion. But the point there also is, if you're curious more about this stuff, there's actually quite a bit of interesting science into scientists looking at the effects of not only frequent sexual acts and not only in viewing adult entertainment on the internet, but also engaging in acts associated with that, and also the effects that frequent ejaculation and sexual practices can have on your body's overall chemistry.
Yes.
So for the example of men and what's commonly referred to as semen retention,
right,
the idea isn't that you keep semen in your body and it gives you superpowers and good aspects. The idea is that if you engage frequently in orgasm in any capacity, whether it's through sex or masturbation, overall it has real, long-lasting, deep impacts in your hormonal structure, from an abundance of prolactin, which can lead to decreased drive and testosterone levels, to not responding properly to dopamine. So your receptors don't respond properly to dopamine production, which is a similar thing in certain instances of drug use for people who use certain drugs too much.
Right.
It has the same effect. So what we're pointing out there is that this stuff is not and has never been just a matter of don't do this thing because we don't want you to, we want to control you. That has, of course, been a part of it, and that's how it's been used in the worst ways. But what we're pointing out is that it comes from a much deeper place than that, and that as time goes on, science only proves more and more
Yes.
in our favor and in the favor of the ancients.
Yes, for sure. And with that being said, I think that covers most of what you need to do during that process. I mean, the other caveats are don't feel negative, don't play into the 7 deadly sins, don't play into lust, greed, envy, wrath, sloth. Be active, exercise, eat properly, meditate and pray, and try to find interconnection.
And consciously, deliberately, and willfully direct your thoughts to your goal.
Yes.
And envision the goal being done. And what's really interesting here is that this overlaps exactly with ancient, medieval, and even modern day magic.
Yes.
Which is that
with a K, magic with a K.
Real magic, which is really just in essence a different form of prayer, I would say. But the overall point is the same, which is that it's less effective to imagine yourself and to firmly fix in your mind yourself doing the thing that gives you your goal. So if your goal is to get a new job, let's say, it's less effective to imagine yourself going out on the street, going into places, filling out job applications, sitting in the interview, and then eventually a person going, "We'd like you to have the job." That's not that it's bad, but that it's much more effective if you envision and fix it firmly in your mind yourself with the goal done. Imagine yourself at your new job. Imagine yourself getting your first paycheck.
Yes.
Imagine yourself down the road getting a promotion. That's what you want. Envision yourself already having the goal attained, not yourself attaining it. That's what you want to focus on.
Yeah. And if you go about it with that kind of positive attitude, there's no way that you won't be able to get some kind of positive benefit from this process. And I think with that basically wraps up a lot of what we had to discuss.
Yes. So remember, pray, meditate, be mindful of your thoughts. Some form of physical activity always helps, and be more mindful and observant of not only your social interactions, but how you interact and how you observe and how you interpret the entire universe. Just do that for a while. You could, and don't have it in mind that you're working towards a new method of looking at the universe. What we're just saying is just observe how you do it. Right. Because you'd be amazed how little people, including ourselves, even now, really know about themselves. Because you just never... You think that you take the time to pay attention, but you really don't take the time to pay attention to a lot of these things. Even to the point of when someone says something like that, you just immediately write it off as being obvious and something that you already do. Right.
And to kind of finalize and end our points here, if you enjoyed this podcast, then you absolutely must look out for when we finalize our book. Because we are going to be writing a book on the sacred secretion, the process of it. We're actually going to go in more into detail than we did in this podcast and give you a lot of droplets of information and source material so that you can utilize it for your future benefit. If you'd like, you can go to our Patreon and pre-order the book. There are different ways in which you can do that. But with that being said, please consider going to our Patreon and supporting us. Follow us on all of our social media.
Smash that like button.
Bring
the shit out of that bell.
That's right. Comment down below what you perceive as something that was really enlightening or important that you kind of pulled from this, or comment on what you'd like for us to talk about next. And with that out of the way, enjoy your day.
Thanks for watching.
God bless. Love you all, and take care.